The single crumpled dollar bill in Luke Hollis's hand was everything. It was the gas money to get to his job site tomorrow. It was the last barrier between him and absolute zero. But then his 9-year-old daughter, Ruby, pointed a small gloved finger toward the shadows of a closed storefront. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice full of a child's pure, heartbreaking empathy. "That little boy is crying. I think they're hungry." Luke's gaze followed hers to a woman huddled over a small child, her body a shield against a wind that bit with icy teeth. He saw a mirror of his own desperation in her eyes, a fear he knew all too well. Every rational thought screamed at him to keep walking, to save that last dollar. It was survival, but the look on his daughter's face and the ghost of his late wife's kindness in his heart made it an impossible choice. This single act of compassion would change everything, and he had no idea that the woman he was about to save would be the one to resurrect a ghost from his past he thought was long buried. He hesitated for only a second, the cold seeping through his worn jacket. He'd left the army years ago, trading a uniform for a tool belt and a life with the woman he loved. He'd thought the hardest battles of his life were behind him. He was wrong. The 6 years since the fire had been a different kind of war, a quiet, grinding battle against bills, loneliness, and the constant fear of failing the one person he had left. The woman in the alley flinched as they approached, pulling her son closer. Her eyes, wide and terrified in the dim streetlight, darted around as if expecting an attack. She wasn't dressed for the streets. Her coat, though dirty, was well made. She looked lost, not homeless. Displaced, like a ship torn from its moorings in a storm. "Hey," Luke said softly, keeping his distance so as not to spook her further. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace, a habit from his old life that had never faded. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The little boy, no older than 5, peeked out from behind his mother's arm. His face was stained with tears, his small body trembling. Ruby stepped forward slightly, her own face a mask of concern. "My name is Ruby," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Are you guys okay?" The woman didn't answer. She just stared at them, a mix of fear and utter exhaustion in her gaze. Luke's heart ached. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had run out of a road, with nowhere left to turn. He turned to the street vendor on the corner, the smell of roasting hot dogs and pretzels thick in the air. The sign read, "Hot dog, $1. $1, his last one. "Stay here, sweetie," he murmured to Ruby, then walked to the cart. He handed over the crumpled bill. "1 hot dog, please." Plain, the vendor, a gruff man with a kind face, looked from Luke to the woman and child, then back again. He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He didn't just hand over a hot dog. He added a bag of chips and a bottle of water, pushing it all toward Luke. "On the house," he grunted. "Kid looks like he needs it." "Thank you," Luke said, genuinely stunned by the small act of grace. He walked back to the alley, his heart pounding a little harder. This was it. After this, his wallet was empty. He knelt down slowly, placing the food on the clean part of the pavement. "Here," he said gently. "It's not much, but it's warm." The woman stared at the food as if it were a mirage. Her son, however, reacted instantly. He scrambled forward, his small hands reaching for the hot dog with a desperation that twisted Luke's gut. The woman pulled him back gently. "Wait, Joel," she whispered, her voice rough and strained. She looked up at Luke, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For the first time, she spoke. Why? It was a simple question, but it held the weight of a world of pain and suspicion. Why would a stranger help them? What did he want in return? Luke glanced at his daughter, who was watching with wide, compassionate eyes. "Because my daughter is right," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "No kid should be hungry." He met the woman's gaze, letting her see the honesty there. "And because my wife," she would have done the same thing. No questions asked. A flicker of something, understanding, maybe even trust, passed through her expression. She nodded slowly, a single tear finally tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She unwrapped the hot dog and gave it to her son, who devoured it in seconds. She opened the water and helped him drink, her movements full of a fierce, protective love that Luke recognized instantly. It was the same love that drove him, that kept him going when everything else fell apart. "We should go, Daddy," Ruby whispered, her hand finding his. "It's getting late." He nodded, knowing they couldn't linger. They had their own problems waiting at home, an empty pantry, an overdue heating bill, and the gnawing uncertainty of tomorrow. He stood up, his knees cracking in the cold. "Take care," he said to the woman, a wholly inadequate phrase for the situation. He turned to leave, his hand tight around Ruby's. He'd done what he could. It wasn't enough, but it was something. "Wait!" Her voice stopped him. He turned back. She was looking at him, her expression intense, searching. She seemed to be memorizing his face. "Thank you," she said, the words heavy with a meaning that went far beyond a simple meal. Luke just nodded, then led Ruby away, the weight of his empty wallet a cold, hard fact in his pocket. As they walked the few blocks back to their small detached house, Ruby looked up at him. "Did we do the right thing, Daddy?" He looked down at her, at the beautiful, kind soul his wife had brought into the world, and felt a surge of love so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. "Yeah, sweetie," he said, forcing a smile. "We did the best thing." He just prayed it wouldn't be the last thing. He had no idea how he was going to afford gas to get to the carpentry job on Monday, let alone buy more groceries. He pushed the thought away. He'd figure it out. He always did. He had to. For Ruby. They went to bed that night with the heat turned down low to save money, huddled under extra blankets. Luke lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The image of the woman and her son burned into his mind. He was haunted by the sheer terror in her eyes. It was more than just the fear of being cold and hungry. It was the fear of being hunted. He'd seen that look before, in war zones on the other side of the world. What in God's name was a woman like that doing on a street corner in his neighborhood? The question followed him into a restless sleep, and he was still turning it over in his mind the next morning when a sound from outside shattered the quiet Sunday morning. It was a low, powerful rumble, the sound of an engine so fine-tuned it barely made a noise. Ruby ran to the window. "Daddy, come look. There's a limousine outside." Luke frowned, getting up from the worn kitchen table. A limo? In his neighborhood of peeling paint and overgrown lawns? It had to be a mistake. He walked to the front door, pulling it open just as a figure in a sharp black suit stepped out of the driver's side. But it wasn't the driver who caught his attention. It was the woman stepping out of the back. She was immaculate. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She wore a deep blue coat that screamed money and a pair of heels that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. But it was her. The same face, the same intense eyes. The woman from the alley. She walked up his cracked pathway, her expression unreadable, and stopped a few feet from his door. "Mr. Hollis?" she asked, her voice now smooth and confident, stripped of the fear and desperation from the night before. "Luke Hollis?" Luke stood there, speechless, his mind struggling to connect the shivering woman from the alley with the powerhouse of a CEO standing on his doorstep. "My name is Maeve Corvin," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And we need to talk." Luke could only stare, his mind reeling. He instinctively pulled Ruby behind him, his body shifting into a protective stance. His army training screamed at him that this was a threat, that a situation changing this drastically, this fast, was never a good thing. One moment a desperate woman on the street, the next a CIO with a limo. It didn't add up. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the chaos churning inside him. Maeve Corvin's expression didn't waver. "I have resources, Mr. Hollis. After you left last night, my security team found me. It wasn't difficult for them to identify the man who showed me a kindness I haven't seen in years." Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Or his daughter." She gave a small, genuine smile to Ruby, who was peeking around Luke's leg. "May I come in?" Maeve asked. "I know this is a lot to process, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't urgent. It's about my son, and it's about what happened last night." Luke hesitated, every instinct on high alert. But he saw her gaze flicker toward the street, a fleeting return of the hunted look from the night before. She was powerful, yes, but she was still scared. He made a split-second decision. "Okay," he said, stepping back. "But the driver stays outside." "He already has his instructions," she said, stepping over the threshold into his small, clean but worn living room. She took in the modest furniture, the framed photos of a smiling woman on the mantel, his late wife Sarah, and the colorful drawings by Ruby taped to the walls. Her eyes lingered on a picture of him in his army dress uniform. "You were military," she stated, not a question. "A long time ago," Luke said curtly. "You said this was urgent." Maeve nodded, her focus sharpening. "Last night, I wasn't poor, Mr. Hollis. I was a target. My ex-husband, Victor Crane, is trying to take my son, Joel. He's a very dangerous man." The composure in her voice cracked just slightly. "He's losing the custody battle in court, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. His men ambushed my security detail at our hotel. They were professional, heavily armed. It was a kidnapping attempt." Luke's blood ran cold. The pieces started clicking into place. The genuine terror, the way she hid, the reason she had nothing. "They overpowered my team," she continued, her voice tight with a memory. "I grabbed Joel and ran. I just ran, down fire escapes, through alleys. I had no phone, no money, nothing, just my son. We were hiding, waiting for my backup team to get a lock on a silent tracker in Joel's coat. You and your daughter found us before they did." The raw fear of her story was palpable. Luke looked at Ruby, imagining for a terrifying second what it would be like to be in that position, to have to run with her like that. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling small and useless. "Is your son okay?" "He's safe for now," Maeve said. "But Victor won't stop. He wants to take Joel out of the country, where I can't reach him. He'll do anything to win." She took a steadying breath, her CEO persona sliding back into place like armor. "To understand what I'm up against, you have to understand my ex-husband. He didn't build his empire legally. He started with a real estate company that he used as a front. A company called Crane Properties." She said the name clinically, as part of her explanation. But for Luke, the world tilted on its axis. Crane Properties. The air was sucked from his lungs. It was like a ghost had whispered the name in his ear. "He made his first fortune in the worst way imaginable," Maeve went on, not noticing the change that had come over him. "An arson-for-profit scheme. He'd have his people set fires in low-income residential buildings he owned, then collect the massive insurance payouts. He destroyed lives for money." Luke felt a tremor start in his hands. He stared at her, the sound in the room fading to a dull roar in his ears. Crane Properties. The name was on every piece of legal paper in the dusty box in his closet. The letters from the insurance company. The useless documents from the cold case file. The company that owned the building where Sarah had been trapped. The fire the department had called accidental, but that he had always known in his gut was something else. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What was the name of the company?" Maeve finally saw it. The shock, the horror, the dawning soul-crushing recognition on his face. She frowned in confusion. "Crane Properties." "Why?" Luke stumbled back a step, his hand finding the wall to steady himself. "That company, they own the building," he breathed, the words tasting like ash. "The building where my wife died." The fire 6 years ago, the silence that fell between them was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shared tragedy. Maeve's eyes widened, her professional composure completely shattering. She looked from Luke's stricken face to the smiling photo of Sarah on the mantel, and understood. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a nightmare. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. It all made sense now. The faulty alarms, the blocked fire escape, the way the investigation had just ended. His wife hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered for an insurance check by the same man who was now trying to steal this woman's son. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over Luke, so potent it almost buckled his knees. For 6 years, he had been grieving a tragedy. Now he knew it was an atrocity. Maeve was the first to speak, her voice trembling but resolute. He took your wife from you. Now he's trying to take my son. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. The dynamic between them had changed forever. They were no longer a CEO and a carpenter. They were two victims of the same monster. I came here to offer you a job, Mr. Hollis, she said, her voice regaining its strength. I need someone I can trust completely. Someone outside of my world. Someone Victor can't buy or intimidate. Your files said you were an Army Ranger, Special Forces. I need you to be my personal security, for me and for Joel. I'll pay you a salary that will change your life. You and Ruby will never have to worry about money again. Luke looked at her, his mind racing. A job, money, safety for Ruby. It was everything he needed, but it was more than that. It was a chance he never thought he'd get. The one thing he'd prayed for every night for 6 years. Justice. He straightened up, the soldier in him taking over. The grief and shock were still there, but now they were forged into something new, something hard and sharp. Purpose. I'll take the job, he said, his voice raw with emotion. But on one condition. Name it, Maeve said without hesitation. I don't just want your money, Luke said, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her flinch. I want your resources. Your lawyers, your investigators, everything you have. You want me to protect your son's future? You have to help me get justice for my wife's past. He held her gaze. Help me prove Victor Crane murdered her. Help me send him to prison for the rest of his life. Maeve looked at the determined, heartbroken man in front of her. She had come here seeking a protector. She had found an avenger. And in his quest for vengeance, she saw the only path to her own salvation. You have a deal, Mr. Hollis, she said, extending her hand. We're going to take him down. Together Luke took her hand, the handshake sealing a pact made in grief and forged in the promise of retribution. As their hands clasped, neither of them could have predicted that this alliance would unearth secrets far darker than they imagined, or that in their shared quest for justice, they would find something else entirely, a reason to live again. The handshake ended, but the electricity of the moment remained, charging the air in the small living room. For a beat, they just stood there, two strangers bound by a shared enemy. Then, the reality of their pact crashed down on Luke. He looked at Ruby, who was watching them with wide, questioning eyes, and the weight of what he'd just agreed to settled on his shoulders. Maeve was the first to move, her CEO efficiency taking over. She pulled out a sleek, impossibly thin phone. We don't have time, she said, her voice sharp and focused. Now that you're with me, Victor will consider you a threat. He has people everywhere. He'll find out you're working for me within hours. You and your daughter are not safe here anymore. Luke's protective instincts flared. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to pack a bag. Both of you, Maeve said, her thumb already flying across the screen. My estate is an hour from here. It's the most secure private residence in the state. Gates, surveillance, a full-time security staff that I trust implicitly. You'll be safe there. I'm having my head of security meet us there and get you situated. Move? Now? Luke's head spun. Leave his home, the only home Ruby had ever really known. The house filled with memories of Sarah? We can't just... We have to, Maeve interrupted, her gaze firm but not unkind. Victor is not a man who makes idle threats. When his men failed to grab Joel, he called me. He told me that if I didn't hand our son over, he would start taking away everyone and everything I care about. Right now, that includes the man who knows his darkest secret. She looked pointedly at Luke. Pack. Please. Clothes, essentials, anything irreplaceable. We need to be gone in 20 minutes. The urgency in her voice was undeniable. He was a soldier again, receiving a direct order under enemy fire. He nodded grimly. Ruby, sweetie, go to your room and pack your favorite toys and your warmest clothes into your backpack. We're going on a little trip, Ruby, ever the trooper, just nodded. With the fancy lady? Maeve knelt down, meeting Ruby at eye level. Yes, and with my son Joel. He's in the car. He's a little shy, but I think he'd be very happy to meet you. That was all Ruby needed. The promise of a new friend sent her scurrying to her room. Luke moved through his house in a daze, throwing clothes, toiletries, and a few precious photos of Sarah into a duffel bag. Each object was a memory, a piece of the life he was leaving behind. He paused in the doorway of his bedroom, the scent of his wife's perfume still faintly lingering in her closet after all these years. He was doing this for her, for them. The thought solidified his resolve. 15 minutes later, they were walking out the front door for the last time. Luke locked it, the click of the deadbolt sounding unnervingly final. As they climbed into the cavernous, leather-scented interior of the limousine, Luke saw the little boy, Joel, strapped into a car seat. He was pale and quiet, his thumb stuck firmly in his mouth as he stared out the window. Ruby, never shy, slid in next to him. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Ruby." "What's your name?" Joel looked at her, then at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Joel," he mumbled around his thumb. "It's nice to meet you, Joel," Ruby said, and then began telling him about her school, her favorite books, and her cat, Patches, who was staying with a neighbor. Luke watched, his heart aching with pride. His daughter's innate kindness was a light in the darkness. As the limo pulled away from the curb, Maeve was already on a conference call, her voice a low, commanding hum. "Arthur, I want the initial brief on my desk by morning. Everything the NTSB and the fire department have on the apartment fire at 1412 Northwood, 6 years ago. I want our private forensics team on retainer, and get me everything on Crane Properties insurance claims for that fiscal year. Yes, everything." Luke listened, a grim satisfaction settling in. This was real. After 6 years of hitting brick walls, the gears of justice were finally beginning to turn. He wasn't just a passenger in this luxurious car. He was an active part of this new war. His eyes scanned the tinted windows, noting the streets they were on, tracking the route, his old training kicking in. The driver was calm, professional, his eyes constantly checking his mirrors. This wasn't just a car. It was a mobile command center. An hour later, they turned onto a private road marked by an imposing stone gate. A guard in a sharp uniform stepped out of a booth, recognized the car, and the massive iron gates swung open. The driveway wound through a forest of manicured trees, finally opening up to a stunning modern house of glass, steel, and stone overlooking a lake. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress. "My team will sweep your old house and have the rest of your things brought here tomorrow," Maeve said, ending her call as the car came to a smooth stop. "You'll be staying in the guest house. It has its own kitchen and living area. You'll have complete privacy." The guest house was larger and more luxurious than any home Luke had ever been in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the lake. The furniture was sleek and modern, the kitchen stocked with food, and the bedrooms felt like they belonged in a 5-star hotel. Ruby gasped, running to the window. "Daddy, can we live here forever?" she asked, her face pressed against the glass. Luke felt a pang of unease. This world of sterile luxury was so far removed from their own. It was a gilded cage, and he wasn't sure he could ever feel at home in it. After the children were introduced to a friendly-looking housekeeper who offered them hot chocolate and cookies, Maeve turned to Luke. Her expression was all business. "My head of security, a man named Gavin, will give you a full briefing in the morning," she said. "He'll get you a weapon, a new phone, everything you need. Your primary job is me and Joel. Eyes on us whenever we are outside this estate. You'll drive us. You'll be the last line of defense, understood," Luke said. "As for my end of the deal," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "my legal team is already pulling the strings. We're treating the fire as a potential homicide. We'll have answers, Luke. I promise you that." It was the first time she'd used his first name. It hung in the air between them, a small acknowledgement of the line that had been blurred. He wasn't just an employee. He was her partner in this. "Thank you, Maeve," he said, the name feeling foreign but right on his tongue. She nodded, then turned to leave. "Get some rest. Your new life starts tomorrow at 0600. She left, and the guest house fell silent. Luke walked through the opulent space, every inch of it a reminder of how much his life had changed in less than 24 hours. He found Ruby in her new bedroom, already curled up on the massive bed, fast asleep from the day's emotional exhaustion. He tucked the blanket around her, kissing her forehead. He walked back into the living room and stood at the vast window, looking out at the dark, placid lake. The estate was silent, secure, a bastion of wealth and power. He had bought his daughter's safety and a chance at justice for his wife. But the cost was clear. He had willingly stepped back into a war, and this time, the enemy wasn't a stranger in a foreign land. He was a man who had already destroyed his life once, and now, Luke was living in the heart of his new battlefield. At 05:30, Luke was already awake. The silence of the guest house was a stark contrast to the familiar morning groans of his old house. He moved silently through the dark, his bare feet padding across the cold hardwood floors. Years of habit had him checking the locks, peering through the blinds, assessing the perimeter. The estate was a fortress, but a fortress was only as strong as its defenders, and he was one of them now. He saw the infrared beams of the security system, the glint of cameras hidden in the trees. It was professional, thorough, but he also saw the vulnerabilities, the long, open view from the lake, the dense woods that could provide cover. His mind, trained to see threats everywhere, was already at work. By 0600, showered and dressed in the simple, practical clothes he'd packed, dark jeans and a Henley shirt, he was standing outside as a crisp, autumn dawn broke over the lake. A man in a sharp, functional suit approached him. He was fit, with cold, intelligent eyes and a military bearing that Luke recognized instantly. "Luke Hollis," the man said, his voice a low baritone. He didn't offer a hand. "Gavin, head of security." "Gavin," Luke acknowledged with a nod. "Maeve filled me in," Gavin said, his eyes scanning Luke from head to toe, a clear, professional appraisal. "Let's be clear. You answer to her, but you operate under my protocols. You're her personal detail, which means you're the tip of the spear, the last man standing between her and a threat. I don't care that you're a carpenter. I care that your file says you spent 6 years in the Rangers. Is that part of you still alive?" "It never died," Luke said simply. A flicker of respect showed in Gavin's eyes. "Good." He handed Luke a heavy-duty Pelican case. "Your kit. Glock 19, 3 mags, concealed carry holster, encrypted comms piece for your ear. 2 secure phones, 1 for personal use, 1 for operational comms with my team. Keys to the vehicle you'll be using. It's a fully armored Escalade. Know how to handle one?" "I'll manage," Luke said, his hands expertly checking the firearm's action. The familiar weight, a cold comfort. "The schedule is on the operational phone," Gavin continued. "School drop-off for both kids at 7:30. Then Maeve to Corvin Industries. You stay with her. No exceptions. You don't eat, you don't take a break, unless I have a man physically relieving you. Is that understood?" "Crystal?" "Victor Crane is resourceful and he's cornered." "That makes him predictable in his unpredictability," Gavin finished. "Expect the worst. Always." He gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving Luke alone with the tools of his new trade. An hour later, the 4 of them were in the Escalade. Luke was behind the wheel, the cool leather a stark contrast to the worn fabric seats of his old truck. He adjusted the mirrors, his eyes constantly scanning, taking in the full 360-degree view. In the back, Ruby was showing Joel a drawing she had made, her cheerful chatter filling the tense silence. Joel was still quiet, but he watched her with wide, curious eyes, a tiny smile playing on his lips. Maeve sat in the passenger seat, a tablet in her hand, but Luke could tell she wasn't focused on her work. She was watching him, observing the way he drove. Never aggressive, but constantly aware, leaving a safe distance, his eyes always moving. "You're different behind the wheel," she said quietly, her voice just for him. "It's the job," he replied, not taking his eyes off the road. The school was as fortified as the estate, a modern, private institution with high fences and a security checkpoint at the entrance. Luke watched as a guard he recognized as part of Maeve's team escorted Ruby and Joel inside. For a moment, watching his daughter walk into this new, intimidating world, his heart clenched. He had traded her familiar, happy life for this high-security existence. In the rearview mirror, he saw Maeve watching the kids disappear inside, her face a mixture of love and fierce anxiety. He saw the mother, not the CEO. Their eyes met in the mirror for a brief second, and in that glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were both parents, doing whatever it took to protect their children. The drive to the downtown headquarters of Corvin Industries was tense. Luke spotted a gray sedan 2 cars back that seemed to be matching their lane changes. He didn't react, didn't give any sign he'd seen it. Instead, he made a series of calm, deliberate turns, taking a route that was illogical for their destination. The sedan followed. "We've got a tail," he said into his comms piece, his voice low and even. "Copy." Gavin's voice crackled back in his ear instantly. "We see it." "Lead him toward the 4th Street exit. A patrol car will handle it." Luke did as instructed. As they exited the highway, a police car, seemingly out of nowhere, pulled the sedan over. Luke seamlessly merged back into traffic, his heart rate never wavering. Maeve let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Was that?" "Victor's people," Luke said grimly. "Just a probe. Seeing what our protocols are, who's driving, they'll know now." She stared at him, at the calm competence he projected. She hadn't just hired a driver. She had hired a shield. The thought was both terrifying and profoundly comforting. They spent the day in her penthouse office, a glass-walled suite overlooking the city. Luke stood quietly in the corner, a silent, watchful presence as she conducted meetings with her executive team. He was a ghost, invisible until he was needed. Late in the afternoon, her private line rang. It was Arthur, her lead attorney. Luke watched as her expression shifted, her focus narrowing. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice tight. Luke couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he saw Maeve's knuckles turn white as she gripped a pen. She made a few notes on a pad, her writing sharp and angry. "Keep digging," she said, and hung up. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. "That was Arthur," she said, her voice low and furious. "He has the initial report on the fire." Luke's entire body went rigid. "And the insurance payout on your building was 3 times the property's market value. The claim was approved and paid in a record 7 days. That's unheard of unless the path is greased," she said, her words like chips of ice. "But that's not the important part." She took a deep breath. The lead fire investigator listed the cause as faulty wiring. That same investigator resigned 2 months later and used his pension to buy a $1 million fishing boat in Florida. But there was someone who disputed the official story. A building superintendent. He had filed 3 official complaints about gas leaks in the weeks before the fire, and was set to be the key witness in a lawsuit against Crane Properties. Luke held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "His name was Frank Miller," Maeve said, her eyes boring into his. "He gave a preliminary statement to the police. Then, a week later, he disappeared. His car was found abandoned 100 miles from the city. He was never seen again. A name, a lead. After 6 years of dead ends and cold silence, it was the first crack in the wall. The hunt had begun." "Frank Miller," Luke repeated, the name tasting like hope and vengeance. "Where do we start?" "Not here," Maeve said, her eyes flicking toward the glass walls of her office. "This place has ears. We talk at the estate." She gathered her things with decisive speed. "The day's over. Let's go get our kids." The ride back was thick with a new kind of tension. It was no longer the quiet apprehension of the morning. It was the coiled energy of a hunt about to begin. Luke drove with the same focused calm, but his mind was a whirlwind. Frank Miller, a man with a face he couldn't recall, but whose fate was now inextricably linked to his own. Back at the estate, after a quiet dinner where both Luke and Maeve made a concerted effort to be present and cheerful for the children, they put Ruby and Joel to bed. They met afterward in the guest house living room. The space felt more secure, more private. Maeve had a tablet, and a large monitor on the wall flickered to life, showing a secure connection to her lead investigator. What we have is a ghost, Luke, Maeve said, her voice low. Frank Miller's social security number hasn't been used in 6 years. No credit cards, no driver's license renewal, no tax records. He vanished, or he was made to vanish, Luke said grimly, leaning over the kitchen counter, which had become their impromptu command center. Victor's not the kind of man to leave loose ends. My thoughts exactly, she agreed. So we don't look for him. We look for the people he was connected to. The people Victor couldn't control. For the next 4 hours, they worked. Maeve directed her team, a formidable digital force that peeled back the layers of Frank Miller's life with surgical precision. They unearthed old phone records, property deeds, and employment histories. Luke's role was different. He provided the context, the human element. He used to talk about fishing, Luke said suddenly, remembering a brief conversation in the hallway of the old building. He had a brother up in Maine, he said. Complained about the drive. Maeve relayed the information. An hour later, the result came back. The brother had died of a heart attack 2 years ago. Another dead end. As the night wore on, the professional barrier between them began to dissolve, eroded by shared purpose and exhaustion. Maeve kicked off her heels and curled her feet under her on the sofa. Luke, a pot of coffee now brewing, moved with a quiet, restless energy around the room. Sarah loved this time of night, Luke said, his voice soft as he stared out the window into the darkness. She was an artist. She said the world was quieter, more honest, after midnight. She did her best work then. He allowed himself a small, sad smile. She would have liked Ruby's drawing of the two of you. She always said kindness was a form of art. Maeve watched him, seeing not just the capable soldier or the determined avenger, but the grieving husband. Tell me about her. He took a deep breath. She was light. She saw the good in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. When I got out of the army, I was coiled pretty tight. She helped me unwind, taught me how to build things instead of break them. His voice caught. Victor Crane didn't just take her life. He stole the future she was building for all of us. The vulnerability in his voice resonated with Maeve's own closely guarded pain. I know what it's like to have your future stolen by him, she said quietly. When I met Victor, he was charming, ambitious, the perfect man. By the time I realized the charm was a mask for his cruelty, I was already trapped. I had Joel. He used my love for my son as a leash. She shook her head, a flicker of self-loathing in her eyes. I'm a CEO. I'm supposed to be one of the smartest people in the room, and I never saw the monster right in front of me until it was too late. That wasn't a business deal, Maeve, Luke said, turning to face her. That was your life. Monsters are good at hiding. That's how they survive. His understanding, his lack of judgment, was a balm on a wound she'd carried alone for years. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment of shared darkness, a current of profound connection passed between them. Got something? The voice of the investigator from the monitor shattered the moment. They both snapped back to the screen. A black and white photo of a young woman appeared. Frank Miller had a sister, the investigator said. Abigail Miller. She cut ties with him 5 years before the fire after a family dispute. We almost missed her. She got married a year after Frank disappeared. Her new name is Abigail Prescott. She lives in a place called North Creek, a small town about 3 hours north of you. Keep going, Maeve commanded. Here's the interesting part, the investigator continued. 3 days after Frank's car was found abandoned, his sister, a waitress with no assets to her name, made a cash deposit into her savings account. $50,000 hush money. The words hung unspoken in the air. It's our first real lead, Luke said, his voice tight with excitement. We have to talk to her. I'll have Gavin put a surveillance team on her first thing in the morning, Maeve said, already strategizing. We'll see who she talks to, where she goes. No, Luke countered immediately. A team of strangers in suits showing up in a small town like that? She'll clam up. Or worse, she'll run, or call whoever paid her off. This needs a different touch. He looked at Maeve, his expression resolute. Let me go. Absolutely not, she shot back, her protective instincts overriding her strategic mind. "You're my personal security, Luke. Your job is here, with me and Joel. I can't send you out into the field alone. It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous not to," he argued, stepping closer. "Maeve, I'm not one of your investigators. I'm not a threat. I'm just a guy who lived in the building, a guy who lost his wife in the same fire that made her brother disappear. I can talk to her, father to, well, victim to victim. I can get her to trust me in a way your people can't." He held her gaze, his own conviction unwavering. "You hired me to be the last line of defense. Sometimes the best defense is going on the attack. This is our first real shot. We have to take it." She stared at him, torn between her duty to protect him as her primary asset and the undeniable logic of his argument. He was right. A personal approach was their best chance. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man with a story that would resonate with this woman. He was their best weapon. She let out a long, slow breath, making her decision. "Fine," she said, her voice laced with reluctance. "You go. But you're not going alone. You'll have a two-man covert team from Gavin's unit as backup, unseen, unheard, but there. You'll be wired for sound, and I'll be listening to every word. And if things go sideways, you pull out immediately. No heroics. Are we clear?" "Clear," Luke agreed. Their partnership had just shifted again. He was no longer just her shield. He was now her agent, heading into enemy territory. And as they stood in the quiet of the guest house, the weight of their mission and their growing reliance on each other settled heavily between them. The next morning, the guest house was a hub of quiet, professional activity. Gavin stood with Luke, running through the final checks. A tiny, flesh-colored comms piece was fitted into Luke's ear, and a microphone, no bigger than a grain of rice, was expertly hidden in the collar of his plain gray jacket. "The backup team is 2 SUVs, 4 men," Gavin said, his voice all business. "They'll be a quarter-mile back on your drive up, and they will set up a perimeter around the town when you arrive. They are ghosts. You won't see them, but they will see you. The key word for an immediate extraction is Bluebird. Say it, and they will be on you in 30 seconds. Any questions?" "No," Luke said, checking the spare magazine for his Glock. "One more thing," Gavin added, handing him a simple silver chain with a small, flat locket on it. "For Ruby. It has a GPS tracker in it, same as the one Joel wears." A precaution, Luke took the locket, the cold metal feeling heavy in his palm. A precaution. It was a stark reminder of the world he had just brought his daughter into. He found Ruby in the main house kitchen, happily eating pancakes with Joel while Maeve watched, a cup of coffee in her hand. Her face was tense, her eyes shadowed with a lack of sleep. "Hey, sweetie," Luke said, kneeling down. "I have to go away for the day. Some important work for Maeve. I need you to be a good girl and stay here with her and Joel, okay?" He fastened the locket around her neck. "And I want you to wear this for me. It's special. It'll keep you safe." Ruby touched the locket, her eyes shining. "Okay, Daddy." "Will you be back for a bedtime story?" "I will try my absolute best," he said, hugging her tightly. "I love you." "Love you too," she mumbled into his shoulder. He stood up, his eyes meeting Maeve's over Ruby's head. He saw the worry there, the fear she was trying so hard to conceal. "Be careful, Luke," she whispered. "Always," he promised. The 3-hour drive to North Creek was a journey into a different world. The highways gave way to 2-lane country roads, the concrete jungle replaced by dense forests and rolling hills. Luke drove a nondescript sedan, blending in. The entire way, the comms piece in his ear was a silent link to Maeve, who was in what she called the war room, a secure office in her home filled with monitors, tracking his every move. "How are you doing?" she asked, her voice a soft presence in his ear after a long stretch of silence. "Focused," he replied. "Just like old times. Does it bother you, going back to this kind of work?" "What bothers me is why I have to," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "For 6 years I've been building things. Decks, cabinets, a life for my daughter. Now, I feel like I have to go back to breaking them." "You're not breaking anything, Luke," she said softly. You're fighting for the truth. There's a difference." Her words settled something in him. She was right. This wasn't destruction. It was excavation. North Creek was exactly as he'd pictured it. A single main street, a handful of shops, a gas station, and a diner. It was the kind of town where everyone knew when you had a cold. Gavin's voice crackled in his ear. "Backup is in position. We've identified Abigail Prescott. She's working her shift at the Corner Booth Diner. You're clear to proceed." Luke parked the car and walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed, and a few patrons looked up from their coffee, their eyes lingering on the stranger. He saw her immediately. She was in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a face etched with a permanent look of worry. She was refilling a sugar dispenser, her movements weary and automatic. He slid into a booth, and a moment later, she was there, a coffee pot in her hand. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice flat. "Just coffee for now, thanks," Luke said. He waited until she had poured it and was about to turn away. "Are you Abigail Prescott?" Her hand froze. Her whole body went rigid. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a sudden panicked fear. "Who's asking?" "My name is Luke Hollis," he said gently, keeping his voice low. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to you about your brother, Frank." "I don't know anything about Frank," she said, her words clipped and fast. "Haven't seen him in years. Now, if you don't want to order, I have other customers." She tried to walk away, but Luke's next words stopped her cold. "I lived in the building on Northwood," he said, "the one that burned down. My wife, Sarah, she died in that fire." Abigail flinched as if he'd struck her. She slowly turned back, her face pale. She sank into the seat opposite him, her hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her eyes darting around the diner. "The truth," Luke said. He pulled out his wallet and took out a small, worn photo of Sarah and a younger Ruby, smiling on a summer day. He slid it across the table. "This is what was taken from me, from my little girl. The fire wasn't an accident, Abigail. You know it, and I know it. Your brother knew it too. That's why he disappeared, isn't it?" "You need to leave," she hissed, pushing the photo back at him. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're going to get us both killed. He's the one you should be afraid of, not me," Luke pressed, his voice firm but empathetic. "Victor Crane. He paid you, didn't he? $50,000 to forget you ever had a brother. But what happens when he decides you're a loose end, Abigail? That money won't protect you then." In his ear, he heard Maeve's sharp intake of breath. Abigail started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "He said he'd kill my kids. He said he knew where they went to school. He said he'd make it look like an accident, just like the fire. I had no choice. It was a confession." Luke felt a surge of adrenaline. "Help me, Abigail," he urged, leaning forward. "Help me put him away so he can't hurt anyone else." "We can protect you." "I swear it." She looked at the photo of Sarah and Ruby, her resolve crumbling. She was trapped between the terrifying memory of Victor's threat and the desperate hope in the eyes of the man sitting across from her. Her face was a mask of torment. She opened her mouth to speak, her eyes wild with fear. "He wasn't," she started, her voice barely a whisper, broken and hoarse. "Frank, he wasn't just going to be a witness." She took a ragged breath, her eyes locking on Luke's. "He was part of it." The words hit Luke with the force of a physical impact. He was part of it. The entire foundation of his quest shifted, cracking beneath his feet. The man he thought was a victim, a loose end Victor had tied up, was one of them, a co-conspirator. His righteous anger was instantly complicated by a nauseating sense of betrayal. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. In his ear, he heard Maeve's sharp, silent intake of breath. Abigail flinched, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The dam of her fear had broken, and now the story came flooding out in a torrent of whispered, panicked words. Frank, he had debts. Gambling. Bad people were after him. He was desperate. She wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the tabletop. A man approached him. He never said the man's name, just called him the Suit. He worked for Victor Crane. They offered Frank a way out, money and a clean slate. What did they want him to do? Luke pressed, keeping his voice even despite the rage churning in his gut. He was the maintenance guy, she choked out. He knew the building, the wiring, the fire exits. His job was to make sure the alarms on the upper floors didn't go off, and to make sure the main fire escape on the north side was jammed. The north side, the side where his apartment had been. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over Luke. Sarah hadn't just been trapped. She had been deliberately caged. They promised him a cut of the insurance money, Abigail continued, her voice trembling. But after the fire, after people died, Frank panicked. He knew they wouldn't pay him. He knew he was just another liability. He tried to confront the Suit, but the man just laughed at him. He told Frank he should be grateful he was still breathing, so he ran, Luke concluded, the pieces clicking into place. He tried to, she sobbed. But before he left, he did something crazy. Something brave, I guess. He was terrified. He told me he'd stolen something. A life insurance policy, he called it. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to use it to protect my family. What was it, Abigail? Luke leaned in, his focus absolute. What did he steal? A ledger, she whispered. A little black book. The Suit was careless. He left it in his car during their last meeting. Frank said it had everything in it. Names, dates, cash payouts for jobs. Not just the fire. Other things, a ledger, the smoking gun. In his ear, Luke heard Maeve whisper a single urgent word. Where? Where is it now, Abigail? Luke asked, echoing the command. Where is the ledger? Frank didn't keep it. It was too dangerous, she said. He put it in a safe deposit box at a bank 2 towns over. He gave me the key. He told me to hide it, to never tell a soul about it unless my life was in danger. Her eyes, filled with a new and desperate terror, locked onto his. My life is in danger, isn't it? Yes, Luke said with brutal honesty. It has been for 6 years, but I can change that. Where is the key? She hesitated, her body trembling. It's at my house, taped behind a picture of our mother. In the hallway, this was it, the turning point. Abigail, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Luke said, his voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone of a soldier giving orders. I'm going to go to your house and get that key, and then I'm getting you and your children out of this town, out of this state, somewhere Victor Crane can never find you. Do you understand? She nodded, tears of fear and relief mingling on her cheeks. Maeve, Luke said quietly, speaking to the woman an hour away, but feeling her presence as if she were right there. The objective has changed. We need the key, and we need to extract the asset, agreed. Maeve's voice was crisp and clear in his ear. Gavin is on it. The key word is Bluebird. Say it when you have the key and Abigail is with you. The team will handle the rest. Luke stood up and threw a $10 bill on the table. Come on, he said to Abigail. Let's go home. Her house was a small, neat bungalow a few blocks away. The walk was the longest of Luke's life. Every passing car, every person on the street, felt like a potential threat. He scanned rooftops, alleyways, parked vehicles. He walked slightly behind Abigail, using his body to shield her. Inside, the house was filled with the clutter of a family's life. Toys on the floor, drawings on the fridge. It was a mirror of his own home, a life that could be shattered in an instant. In here, Abigail said, leading him to a narrow hallway lined with family photos. She pointed to an old, faded portrait of a stern-looking woman. Behind that one, Luke carefully took the picture down. There, taped to the cardboard backing, was a small, tarnished silver key. He peeled it off, the metal cold against his skin. He held in his palm the physical proof of Victor Crane's crimes, the key to justice for Sarah. He turned to Abigail. Go get your kids. Pack a single bag for each of you, just the essentials. We have 5 minutes. As she scrambled to obey, Luke spoke into his comms. Bluebird. I have the package. I repeat. Bluebird. Copy Bluebird, Gavin's voice responded. Team is mobile. ETA 2 minutes. Luke stood by the front window, peering through the blinds. He watched as Abigail ushered her two sleepy, confused children into the living room. Just as she was zipping the final bag, two black SUVs, the same models as the backup team, rounded the corner, their movements silent and swift. They pulled up to the curb, and four men in dark functional gear emerged. They moved with a fluid, disciplined grace that spoke of years of training. One of them met Luke at the door. "We'll take it from here, sir," he said, his eyes already scanning the street. Luke nodded and turned to Abigail. "These men will take you somewhere safe," he said. "They work for Maeve." "You can trust them." She clutched his arm, her eyes filled with a desperate gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For what it's worth." Frank was sorry. He never meant for anyone to get hurt. Luke didn't answer. He couldn't find forgiveness in his heart right now. Not yet. He just watched as the security team efficiently and silently bundled the family into one of the SUVs. A minute later, they were gone. The street was quiet again, as if nothing had ever happened. He stood alone in the empty, silent house, the small, cold key clutched in his hand. He had found the truth, but it was uglier and more complicated than he could have ever imagined. His mission had changed. He wasn't just chasing a ghost anymore. He was holding the map to his treasure. He walked out of the house, got into his car, and started the engine. He put the comms piece back in his ear. "Maeve, I'm here, Luke." Her voice came back, laced with an audible wave of relief. "I heard everything. Are you okay?" "I have it," he said, his voice a low, determined growl. "The key. It's in my hand." He put the car in gear, his eyes already on the road, on the path that led away from this town and toward the final confrontation. "Now tell me, where's the bank?" "The bank is in a town called Oak Haven, 30 minutes west of your current location." Maeve's voice came through, calm and steady, a stark contrast to the adrenaline coursing through Luke's veins. "It's called Oak Haven Community Bank. My team has already flagged it. There's one problem, Luke. It's 4:30. They close in 30 minutes. Luke glanced at the dashboard clock. 30 minutes. He could make it, but it would be tight. "What happens if I don't get there in time?" "We don't have the luxury of waiting until morning," she said, her tone hardening. "Victor has eyes everywhere. He'll know we have Abigail. It's a race, and he doesn't know we have a head start. We have to press that advantage." There was a brief pause, the sound of her typing quickly. "Hold on. I'm handling it." Luke drove, pushing the sedan to its limit on the winding country roads. He trusted Maeve to clear the path. He focused on the road, on the mission. He was an instrument, and she was the one pointing him at the target. 20 minutes later, his operational phone buzzed. It was a text from Maeve. "Bank will remain open. Manager's waiting for you. I'm on my way." "On your way?" Luke asked into the comms. "Maeve, that's not a good idea." "The risk. The risk is letting you walk into that bank alone." She cut him off. "This ledger is the key to my son's safety and your wife's justice. This is my fight as much as it is yours. I'm not sitting this out." There was a loud whirring sound in the background of her transmission. "I'm taking the chopper. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Gavin and his primary team are with me. Get the key inside and wait for us. Do not go into the vault alone." Her tone left no room for argument. She was coming. The thought sent a complicated mix of apprehension and relief through him. He arrived in Oak Haven, a town even smaller and quieter than North Creek. The bank was a stately old brick building on the main square. As he pulled up, a nervous-looking man in a suit, the bank manager, was standing at the glass doors, clearly waiting for him. Luke got out of the car, his hand instinctively resting on the small of his back, where the Glock was concealed. The manager, a man named Peters, practically scurried him inside, locking the door behind them. "Ms. Corvin called," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "She was very persuasive. The vault is ready. We're waiting for her arrival." Luke simply nodded, his eyes scanning the empty bank lobby, the teller windows dark, the security cameras blinking their silent red eyes. He was in a sterile, quiet box, holding a key that could set off an explosion. True to her word, Maeve arrived 20 minutes later. The sound of the helicopter descending on a nearby community park turned every head in the small town. She swept into the bank flanked by Gavin and two other formidable-looking agents. She looked powerful, in command, but when her eyes met Luke's, he saw the same anxiety he felt. "Let's go," she said, her voice low. The manager led them down to the vault. The massive circular steel door stood open. Inside, rows of gleaming metal boxes lined the walls. It was cold, silent, and smelled of old paper and steel. "Box 34B, Luke said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Peters led them to the box and then, with a nervous glance at Gavin, discreetly left them alone in the vault, closing the heavy door most of the way but not locking it. It was just Luke, Maeve, and Gavin. Luke stepped forward. The box required 2 keys, the bank's and the owner's. Peters had already inserted the bank's key. Luke took a deep breath, the small silver key from Abigail's house feeling heavy in his hand. He slid it into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. He pulled open the small metal door. The box was long and narrow, and inside, nestled on the cold metal, was a single object, a small, black, leather-bound book. It was unassuming, plain, the kind of thing you could buy in any office supply store. But Luke knew it was the most dangerous object he had ever held. He lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. He handed it to Maeve. She took it with a reverence usually reserved for a sacred text. Her fingers, trembling slightly, traced the worn leather cover. "This is it," she whispered, a mixture of triumph and dread in her voice. They looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement of the monumental step they had just taken. They had won. She opened it to the first page. The writing inside was small, neat, and clinical. It was a list of dates, names, and numbers. The second entry on the page made Maeve's breath catch in her throat. Date, October 12th, 6 years ago. Job, Northwood Property. Operative, F. Miller. Payout, $10,000. Initial. Notes, job complete. 1 casualty. Loose end, 1 casualty. Sarah, reduced to a clinical note in a killer's ledger. Luke felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. He had to physically restrain himself from punching the cold steel wall of the vault. "We have him," Luke said, his voice a low growl. "We have him." Just as Maeve was about to turn the page, the operational phone in Gavin's hand buzzed with a frantic, high-priority alert. He answered it, his face grim. "What is it?" Maeve demanded, seeing his expression. Gavin listened for a moment, his jaw tight. "It's the estate," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. "It's a priority 1 alert." From the housekeeper, Maeve's blood ran cold. She snatched her own phone, dialing the house's private line. It was answered on the first ring. "Maria, what's wrong?" she yelled into the phone, her voice frantic. "Are the children okay?" "The children are fine, ma'am. They are safe." The housekeeper's panicked voice came through. "They are with me in the panic room." But someone was on the property. The alarms went off on the west perimeter, by the lake. When the team responded, they didn't find an intruder. What did they find? Maeve pressed, her heart hammering. There was a pause, and then the housekeeper's voice came back, thick with fear. "They found a single dead bird on the guest house doorstep, ma'am." A crane. A crane. It wasn't a breach. It was a message, a calling card. Victor knew. He knew where Luke was staying. He knew they were coming for him, and he was telling them that he could get to their children whenever he wanted. The victory of finding the ledger evaporated, replaced by the ice-cold dread of a new, immediate threat. They had the weapon to end the war, but the enemy had just moved his pieces to their front door. "Get the chopper ready," Maeve barked at Gavin, already moving toward the vault door, the ledger clutched in her hand. "We're going back." Now the helicopter ride back was a frantic, roaring blur. The rhythmic thumping of the rotor blades was a poor match for the chaotic pounding of Luke's heart. He sat strapped in, staring out at the landscape blurring below, the ledger in a locked briefcase on the seat between him and Maeve. He was a protector, a shield, and he had been 100 miles away when the enemy had reached his daughter's doorstep. The feeling of failure was a cold, heavy weight in his gut. Maeve was a storm of controlled fury, issuing a relentless series of commands into her satellite phone, coordinating with Gavin on the ground, demanding status updates, locking down the estate into a state of impenetrable alert. When they landed, they didn't go to the guest house. They ran straight for the main house, to the reinforced, soundproofed room in the basement that served as the estate's security hub. Gavin was there, his face grim, standing before a bank of monitors showing every angle of the property. He was a professional, Gavin said without preamble. Came in from the lake on a low-profile, submersible drone to bypass the thermal scanners. He was on the property for less than 90 seconds. He never tried to enter the house. The bird was the only objective. He wanted us to know he was here. Just then, the door opened, and Maria, the housekeeper, ushered the children in. "Daddy!" Ruby cried, running and launching herself into Luke's arms. He caught her, holding her so tightly it was a wonder she could breathe. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, assuring himself that she was real, that she was safe. Across the room, Maeve did the same, kneeling and wrapping Joel in a fierce embrace. "There was a bad bird," Joel mumbled into her shoulder, his little body still trembling. "It's gone now, sweetie," Maeve soothed, her voice shaking despite her efforts to stay calm. "It's gone, and you're safe. I've got you." After they had calmed the children and sent them with Maria to the main house kitchen for a late-night snack, the four of them, Luke, Maeve, and Gavin, were left in the sterile silence of the war room. "We can't wait for the courts," Luke said, breaking the silence. His voice was raw. "We can't sit here and wait for him to try again." This was a warning. The next time, he won't leave a bird. "My recommendation is to fortify," Gavin countered, his gaze fixed on the monitors. "Double the patrols. Lock down this estate. He can't get to you here." "He's not going to stop, Gavin," Maeve said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He'll go after our associates, our friends. He'll burn my world down from the outside in until I have nothing left. Hiding is a losing game. Luke is right. We have to end this." Now she looked at the briefcase on the table. "We have the one thing he wants more than anything, the one thing he's terrified of." She looked from the case to Luke, then to Gavin. A plan was forming in her mind. A high-stakes gambit, born of desperation and cold, calculated rage. "We're going to use it as bait," she announced. Gavin looked at her in disbelief. "You want to arrange a meet?" "Maeve, that's insane. He'll kill you both." "No, he won't," she said, her confidence unnerving. "Because I know him. I know his weakness. It's not money, it's pride. He cannot stand the thought of this ledger existing in the world, a testament to the fact that he's nothing more than a common thug. He won't trust his men to retrieve it. He has to do it himself. He has to look me in the eye and take back the power. His ego will demand it." It was a terrifying, brilliant plan. Luke saw the logic in it immediately. It was the kind of high-risk, high-reward move that could win a war in a single stroke. "We set the time. We set the place," Luke added, his mind already working through the tactical possibilities. "We control the field." "It's the only way," Maeve said, her decision made. "Gavin, I want our best people ready. We're going to set a trap he can't escape." Later that night, after hours of planning, a fragile quiet settled over the house. The children were asleep. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and the final plan was in place. Luke found Maeve standing on a secure, glass-enclosed balcony, staring out at the dark water of the lake where the intruder had come from. "I'm sorry, Luke," she said, not turning to look at him. "I'm so sorry I brought this to your door, that I put Ruby in danger." "You didn't," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Victor Crane did that 6 years ago when he gave the order to burn down my home. We've been in his danger all this time. We just didn't know it. You didn't bring this on me, Maeve. You gave me a way to fight back." She finally turned to him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I'm so scared," she admitted, the confession a bare whisper. "Not for me. For Joel. For Ruby. For you." I'm scared too, he confessed, his voice rough with an emotion he'd suppressed for years. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're on the right side of it. We're not victims anymore. The space between them felt charged, the air thick with everything they had been through. The shared fear, the shared purpose, the quiet moments of understanding. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand covering hers on the railing. Her skin was cold, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, her fingers lacing with his. It was an anchor in the storm, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had forged between them in the crucible of the last few days. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. He saw not a CEO, but a terrified mother. Not a client, but a partner. A woman of incredible strength and profound vulnerability. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not born of passion, but of something deeper. It was a desperate searching connection, a promise of a future they both knew they might not get to see. It was a raw, honest expression of fear and hope, and the startling, unexpected discovery of finding a reason to live right when they were closest to death. When they broke apart, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just stood there, holding hands, watching the dark water. An hour later, Maeve sat in the war room, the ledger on the desk in front of her. Luke stood behind her, a silent, steady presence. With Gavin and her legal team on a muted conference line, she made the call. Victor Crane answered on the second ring, his voice oozing a false, predatory charm. "Maeve, darling. I was just thinking of you. Cut the act, Victor." Maeve's voice was pure ice. "I have it. The book, Frank Miller's insurance policy." The silence on the other end of the line was more telling than any threat. "I'm willing to talk," she continued. "One time. You get the ledger. In exchange, you disappear. You give up all parental rights to Joel. You sign a binding agreement to never come near me or my son again. And you set up a restitution fund for the victims of the Northwood fire, including a full settlement for the Hollis family. You do that, and the ledger vanishes. You refuse, and it goes straight to the district attorney." He laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You think you can corner me?" "I think you'll do anything to get this book back," she said calmly. "Midnight, the old Atlantic shipyard. Pier 4. Come alone. If I see anyone else, the deal is off, and you can read all about it in the morning papers." There was a long pause. Luke held his breath. He could almost hear the gears turning in Victor's mind, his arrogance warring with his caution. "Fine," Victor finally snarled. "Midnight. But if this is a trap, Maeve, the consequences will be biblical." He hung up. Maeve slowly placed the phone back in its cradle. She looked up at Luke, her eyes hard and clear. He took the bait. The Atlantic shipyard was a graveyard of rusting steel, a skeleton of industry silhouetted against a moonless sky. The air smelled of salt, decay, and the cold, wet metal of the abandoned piers. Luke stood with Maeve in the shadow of a colossal, silent crane, the designated meeting point on Pier 4. The only light came from a single, flickering floodlight that cast long, dancing shadows. In his ear, the comms were silent, a testament to the discipline of Gavin's team, who were hidden in the darkness like ghosts. Luke's senses were on fire. He registered every creak of metal, every slap of water against the pilings, the distant cry of a gull. He was back in the zone, a place of hyper-awareness he hadn't inhabited for years. He stood slightly in front of Maeve, his body angled to protect her. In her hand, she clutched the briefcase containing the ledger. "He's late," she whispered, her breath a small white cloud in the frigid air. "He'll come," Luke said, his voice a low rumble. His ego wouldn't let him miss this. As if summoned by his words, the headlights of a single powerful car cut through the darkness at the far end of the shipyard. The car moved slowly, cautiously, before coming to a stop. A lone figure emerged. Victor Crane. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and moved with the predatory grace of a shark. He walked onto the pier, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel, a confident, mocking smile on his face. "Maeve, my love," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. Always a flair for the dramatic. And I see you've brought your pet carpenter. He stopped 20 feet away, his eyes cold and empty, fixing on Luke. You've been a busy man, Mr. Hollis. A very foolish one. It's over, Victor, Maeve said, her voice steady and clear, betraying none of the fear Luke knew she felt. The book for our freedom. That's the deal, Victor laughed. You think you can bargain with me? You who I made. Everything you have is because of me. Everything I have I built, she shot back. You don't build, Victor. You only burn. His smile tightened. That fire, a pittance to pay for progress. Your wife was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Hollis. Collateral damage. I'd advise you to remember that it was a confession, delivered with a chilling lack of remorse. It was everything they needed. Luke felt a murderous rage surge through him, so potent he had to clench his fists to keep from lunging at the man. He felt Maeve's hand brush his back, a small, grounding touch. Not yet. Stick to the plan. The ledger, Victor, Maeve said, holding up the briefcase. Let's end this. She placed the briefcase on a rusty oil drum between them and stepped back. Victor's eyes were locked on it, gleaming with a possessive hunger. He started forward, his smug smile returning. The trap was about to spring, but as he reached for the case, he paused. You know, I'm a sentimental man, Maeve, he said, pulling a small remote from his pocket. I wanted to give you a parting gift. Something to remember me by. He pressed a button. A section of the pier behind Luke and Maeve erupted in a shower of sparks, followed by a deafening bang. It wasn't a bomb meant to kill, but a powerful explosive charge designed to collapse the pier, to cut off their only escape route. The plan had been to trap him. Instead, he had trapped them. As the pier groaned and shuddered, Victor lunged for the briefcase, but he had fatally underestimated his opponent. The explosion that was meant to startle and trap Luke instead acted as a starting pistol. In that split second of chaos, Luke was no longer a carpenter. He was a ranger. He moved with a speed that was brutally efficient. He shoved Maeve behind the solid steel base of the crane, yelling, "Get down!" before turning back to Victor. Victor, surprised by his speed, had the briefcase but was fumbling to draw a pistol from inside his coat. He never got the chance. Luke closed the distance in 3 strides, his hand striking Victor's wrist with surgical precision. Bones crunched, the gun clattered to the pier, and Victor screamed in pain. Luke didn't stop. He drove his shoulder into Victor's chest, slamming him back against a shipping container. The briefcase flew from his grasp, skittering across the pier. Before Victor could recover, Luke had him pinned, his forearm pressed hard against his throat. "This is for Sarah," he snarled, his face inches from Victor's, his eyes burning with 6 years of cold, contained fury. Suddenly, the night erupted in light. Floodlights from all directions snapped on, bathing the pier in an inescapable white glare. The ghosts appeared. Gavin's team moving in from the shadows, weapons raised, silent and lethal. From the entrance to the shipyard, the wail of sirens grew louder. It was over. 6 months later, the world was a different place. Victor Crane, faced with the undeniable evidence of the ledger and the testimony of a protected Abigail Prescott, was convicted on 16 counts, including racketeering, fraud, and felony murder. He would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison. The name Crane Properties was now synonymous with crime and corruption. The estate on the lake was no longer a fortress, but a home. The gates were still there, but now they often stood open. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawns. On a warm spring afternoon, in the backyard overlooking the water, a small group of people gathered. Luke, dressed in a simple but elegant suit, stood watching his daughter Ruby, now a confident 10-year-old, throw a stick for a golden retriever. Joel, no longer a shy, thumb-sucking little boy, ran laughing beside her. They were brother and sister in all the ways that mattered. Luke felt a hand slide into his. He looked down at Maeve, radiant in a simple white dress, her eyes filled with a peace he had never seen before. Today was their wedding day. It wasn't a grand affair for the society pages. It was a quiet celebration for their family. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He smiled, squeezing her hand. I was just thinking about a cold night, a street vendor, and a single crumpled dollar bill. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Who knew it was the best investment you'd ever make? He looked at their children, at the beautiful home they had built from the ashes of their pasts, at the incredible woman standing beside him. He had spent his last dollar on an act of kindness, an echo of the wife he had lost. He had never imagined that single dollar would buy him a second chance at everything. It had bought him justice. It had bought him peace. And most unexpectedly of all, it had bought him a new beginning, a new family, and a love he thought he would never feel again. The best, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to her, his wife, and kissed her as their children's laughter danced on the breeze. By far. If you're hearing this, it means you stayed to the very end. Thank you. That honestly means the world to me. I really hope you got something out of it. Maybe a new way of looking at things, a moment of peace, or just a good escape from the everyday. If you did, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. You see, we're on a mission here, to prove that deep, meaningful stories still have a place in this world. When you subscribe, it's like you're telling us, keep going. When you hit that like button, you're giving the story a little push so it can find the next person who might need it. Don't forget those notifications so you know when the next one is ready. From me to you, thank you for being here. Carry the best parts of this one with you.